Jonah Briggs. The name used to echo through saloons and whisper through canyons. A name that meant death to some and justice to others. But those days were gone, or so he thought. Now, years after hanging up his guns, Jonah lived a simple life in the small town of Havenwood. His cabin, nestled beside a clear, babbling creek, was a far cry from the dusty battlefields of his past. He was an old man now, his face etched with the stories of a life lived hard. His hands, once lightning fast on the draw, were now gnarled and weathered. His hair, once the color of midnight, was now streaked with silver like the morning sky. But his eyes, those steely blue eyes, still held a spark of the man he used to be, a spark that hadn't been snuffed out by time or peace. His only companion was Blue, an old hound dog with fur the color of a stormy sea. Blue was more than just a dog. He was Jonah's family, his confidant, his shadow. They were always together, fishing in the creek, napping in the sun, or simply sitting on the porch, watching the world go by. Life in Havenwood was slow, predictable, just the way Jonah liked it. Mornings began with the sunrise, a cup of strong coffee brewed over a crackling fire, and Blue nudging his hand for a scratch behind the ears. They'd walk into town, Jonah exchanging nods with the townsfolk, Blue sniffing at every post and tree. He'd pick up supplies at Mrs. Gable's general store, maybe share a few words with old Doc Hemlock about the weather or a lingering ache in Jonah's bones. Afternoons were for fishing. Jonah would cast his line into the creek, Blue patiently waiting by his side, his tail thumping softly against the ground. Sometimes they'd catch something, sometimes they wouldn't. It didn't matter. It was the peace, the quiet that Jonah craved. Evenings were spent on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues of orange and red. Jonah would read, Blue would sleep at his feet, and the crickets would chirp their nightly song. It was a life far removed from the gunfights and bloodshed that had once defined him. A life he had earned, a life he cherished. He hoped it would stay that way forever. But peace is a fragile thing. Like a pane of glass, it can be shattered in an instant. The first sign of trouble came with the dust cloud on the horizon, a cloud that grew larger and darker as it approached Havenwood. Soon, the source became clear, a gang of riders clad in black, their faces hidden behind bandanas. They rode into town like a storm, their horses kicking up dust and scattering chickens. Their leader, a man named Krell, was a towering figure with a cruel sneer and eyes that held no warmth. He surveyed Havenwood with disdain, as if it were a stain on the earth. Krell and his gang were outlaws, wanted in several territories for robbery, murder, and general mayhem. They were looking for a place to lay low, a place to exploit. And Havenwood, with its quiet streets and peaceful inhabitants, looked like the perfect target. The townsfolk watched from behind closed doors and shuttered windows, a sense of dread washing over them. The peace that Jonah Briggs held so dear was about to be broken, and Havenwood would never be the same. Krell's gang wasted no time establishing their dominance. They swaggered into the saloon, demanding drinks and harassing the waitresses. They overturned tables, broke chairs, and generally made a nuisance of themselves. Old Man Hemlock tried to intervene, but Krell simply shoved him aside, sending him sprawling onto the floor. Mrs. Gable's store was ransacked, food and supplies stolen without a second thought. Fear hung heavy in the air. Jonah watched it all from his porch, his eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. He saw the fear in the eyes of his neighbors, the helplessness in their faces. He knew what these men were capable of. He had seen their kind before, but he held back. He had promised himself a peaceful life, and he was determined to keep that promise. But Krell wasn't finished. He needed to send a message, a clear signal that he was in charge. And he chose the cruelest way to do it, the way that would finally break Jonah Briggs. Jonah was sitting on his porch, Blue resting his head on his lap, when Krell and two of his men rode up. Krell grinned, a cruel, twisted expression. Briggs, he sneered, heard you were a legend. But legends die, don't they? Before Jonah could react, one of Krell's men raised his rifle. Blue, sensing the danger, jumped up, barking fiercely. The shot rang out, shattering the afternoon calm. Blue yelped, staggered, and fell to the ground, his eyes wide with pain and confusion. Jonah roared, a sound that came from the depths of his soul. He lunged forward, but Krell's men held him back. Krell dismounted, walked over to Blue, and kicked him. "Just a mutt," he said, spitting on the ground. "A lesson for you, old man. Don't cross me." Then he and his men rode off, laughing. Jonah knelt beside Blue, cradling him in his arms. Blue whimpered, licked Jonah's hand, and then went still. Jonah's eyes, once filled with a quiet peace, now burned with a cold, terrible rage. The peace was gone. The legend was about to be reborn. Jonah buried Blue beneath the old oak tree behind his cabin, a simple wooden cross marking the spot. He stood there for a long time, the grief washing over him like a tidal wave. He remembered all the good times, the quiet moments, the unwavering loyalty of his friend. Tears streamed down his weathered face, tears of sorrow, tears of rage. Then, as the sun began to set, a change came over him. The grief didn't disappear, but it was replaced by a cold resolve. He walked back to his cabin, his steps purposeful. He went to the old wooden chest hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were his guns. 2 Colt Peacemakers, their handles worn smooth with use. He hadn't touched them in years. He cleaned them carefully, his hands moving with a practiced ease that belied his age. He checked the chambers, loaded the cartridges. The familiar weight of the guns in his hands felt strangely comforting. Jonah Briggs was gone, but the gunslinger was back, and he had a score to settle. Jonah didn't ride into town guns blazing. He was old, but he wasn't foolish. He needed information. He knew Krell's men frequented the saloon, so he waited until dusk when the shadows were long and the light was fading. He approached from the alley, silent as a ghost. 2 gang members were guarding the back entrance, laughing and drinking. Jonah didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, silently. A swift kick to the first man's knee, a muffled grunt, and he was down. The second man turned, surprised, but Jonah was already on him. A blow to the throat, and he crumpled to the ground. He slipped inside, his eyes scanning the room. Krell wasn't there, but several of his men were at a table, playing cards. Jonah took a deep breath and stepped into the light. "You boys work for Krell?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. The men looked up, their faces hardening. The card game was over. The legend had returned, and he was looking for a fight. The gunfight in the saloon was short and brutal. Jonah, despite his age, moved with a speed and precision that surprised everyone. 3 men went down before the others could even draw their weapons. The remaining gang members scattered, fear etched on their faces. Jonah didn't chase them. He had made his point. News of the shootout spread through Havenwood like wildfire. Some townsfolk were terrified. Jonah Briggs, the peaceful old man, had become the gunslinger again. They remembered the stories, the legends of his past, the violence he was capable of. Others were hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, Jonah could save them from Krell and his gang. Mrs. Gable, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and gratitude, left a basket of food on his porch. Doc Hemlock offered to tend to any wounds, his voice trembling slightly. But everyone, young and old, knew that Havenwood's fate now rested on the shoulders of an aging gunslinger, a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. That night, a soft knock echoed on Jonah's door. He opened it to find Sarah, the young woman who worked at the telegraph office. She was nervous, her hands trembling. "Mr. Briggs," she said, her voice barely a whisper, I overheard Krell talking. He's planning to leave tomorrow morning. He's taking all the town's money with him." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "How do you know this, Sarah?" I can read the telegraph messages. He sent one to a contact in Black Ridge, asking for a safe place to meet." Sarah hesitated, then continued, "I know it's dangerous, but I can't stand by and watch him destroy our town." Jonah nodded, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "I appreciate this, Sarah. You're a brave woman." He knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed information, and Sarah was his only source. She offered him a map she had secretly copied, showing the route Krell planned to take. With Sarah's help, Jonah had a chance. A slim one, but a chance nonetheless. He wasn't just fighting for Blue anymore. He was fighting for Havenwood. Jonah followed Krell's trail, using Sarah's map. He found them camped near a rocky canyon. He planned to ambush them, but Krell was smarter than he thought. The gang had set up guards, and one of them spotted Jonah. A gunfight erupted, the canyon echoing with the sound of gunfire. Jonah took down 2 more men, but he was outnumbered. A bullet grazed his arm, another pierced his side. He stumbled, his vision blurring. Krell appeared, a cruel smile on his face. "Thought you could stop me, old man," he sneered. "You're not so tough anymore." Krell's men disarmed Jonah and tied him to a tree. Krell examined the map Sarah had given him. "So, the little telegraph girl betrayed us," he said, his eyes narrowing. "She'll pay for that." Jonah struggled against his bonds, his heart filled with rage and despair. He had failed. He had let Havenwood down, and now Sarah was in danger. He had to escape. But how? He was wounded, outnumbered, and tied to a tree. His legend might be over after all. As the gang celebrated their victory, Jonah quietly worked at the ropes binding him. He remembered a trick his father taught him, a way to loosen knots with subtle movements. It took time, and the pain in his side was excruciating, but slowly the ropes began to loosen. Just as Krell was about to leave for Havenwood, Jonah broke free. He lunged at the nearest guard, knocking him to the ground and grabbing his knife. He cut himself loose completely and, despite his wounds, moved with surprising speed. He knew he couldn't take them all head-on, not in his condition. He used the shadows, the rocks, anything to his advantage. He picked off the guards one by one, silently and efficiently. Fueled by rage and the burning need to protect Sarah and Havenwood, he fought with a ferocity that even surprised himself. He was wounded, tired, and outnumbered, but he was Jonah Briggs, and he wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. He had a promise to keep, a debt to repay, and Krell was going to pay in blood. Jonah found Krell preparing to ride out, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Looks like you're not as dead as I thought, old man," Krell said, his hand hovering over his gun. "But you should have stayed down." "You made a mistake, Krell," Jonah replied, his voice steady despite the pain. "You messed with the wrong town, and you killed my dog." "He was just a mutt," Krell sneered. "Collateral damage." "He was my family," Jonah said, his eyes hardening. "And now you're going to pay for it." The 2 men faced each other, the tension thick in the air. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying the scent of blood and gunpowder. It wasn't just a gunfight. It was a battle of wills, a clash between good and evil. Krell was younger, stronger, but Jonah had something Krell could never possess: a lifetime of experience, a burning desire for revenge, and the unwavering belief in what was right. The showdown had begun. Krell drew first, his shot echoing through the canyon. Jonah ducked, the bullet whizzing past his ear. He returned fire, his aim true despite his wounds. The 2 men exchanged shots, each bullet finding its mark, tearing through flesh and bone. Krell was fast, but Jonah was faster. He had seen it all before, countless times. Krell lunged at Jonah, trying to overpower him with brute force. But Jonah was too quick. He sidestepped Krell's attack and slammed the butt of his gun into Krell's jaw. Krell staggered back, dazed. Jonah didn't hesitate. He drew his other gun and fired. Krell fell to the ground, clutching his chest. His eyes widened in disbelief as he looked up at Jonah. You can't win," he gasped. "I already have," Jonah said, his voice cold and hard. "Havenwood is free." Krell's eyes glazed over, and he went still. Jonah stood over him, his gun smoking, his body aching. The fight was over. The gang was defeated. Havenwood was safe. But what cost? Jonah returned to Havenwood a hero, but he didn't feel like one. The townsfolk cheered him, but he couldn't shake the image of Blue lying lifeless on his porch. He had avenged his friend, but at what cost? He had brought violence back to Havenwood, a place he had hoped to keep peaceful. Sarah tended to his wounds, her eyes filled with gratitude and something more. He saw a flicker of hope, a possibility of a future. But could he stay? Could he put down roots in a place that would forever remind him of his loss? He stood at a crossroads. He could stay and help rebuild Havenwood, become the protector they needed. Or he could ride off into the sunset, leaving the violence behind him, forever the gunslinger, forever alone. The decision weighed heavily on him. He looked at Sarah, at the grateful faces of the townsfolk, and then at the empty space beside him where Blue used to be. He knew what he had to do, but was he strong enough? A week later, Havenwood was slowly returning to normal. The bullet holes in the saloon had been patched, the stolen goods replaced. The fear that had gripped the town was beginning to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism. Sarah was busy at the telegraph office, sending messages of hope and resilience to neighboring towns. Mrs. Gable's store was bustling with activity, the shelves overflowing with supplies. Jonah stood on his porch, watching the sunset. He had made his decision. He wasn't riding off. He was staying. He had helped Havenwood once, and he would do it again if needed. But he wouldn't be the gunslinger anymore. He would be Jonah Briggs, the protector. He looked towards Blue's grave, a small smile on his face. He knew he could never replace Blue, but he could honor his memory by helping to build a better future for Havenwood. He owed it to Blue. He owed it to himself. He owed it to the town that had given him a second chance. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town. Havenwood was safe. For now. Years passed. Havenwood prospered. Children played in the streets. Laughter filled the air, and the town was known for its kindness and resilience. Jonah Briggs, the old gunslinger, became a legend whispered around campfires. Some said he had vanished, riding off into the sunset, his duty done. Others claimed he still walked the streets of Havenwood, a silent guardian, watching over the town. Sarah, now running the general store, would often smile when she heard these stories. She knew the truth. Jonah was still there, still protecting Havenwood, not with guns, but with his wisdom and his unwavering spirit. One evening, a young boy, playing near the creek, found an old, rusted gun. He ran to Jonah, his eyes wide with excitement. "Mr. Briggs, look what I found." Jonah took the gun, his fingers tracing the worn handle. He looked at the boy, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "That's a dangerous thing, son," he said gently. "Guns are for fighting, and fighting is never the answer." He handed the gun back to the boy. "But sometimes," he added, a twinkle in his eye, "a good man has to do what a good man has to do." The legend of Jonah Briggs lived on. A legend of violence, yes, but also a legend of justice, of sacrifice, and of the enduring power of the human spirit. A legend whispered on the wind, carried through the canyons, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can always be found.